We're going to start our Easter series this morning, work our way up to Easter Sunday. You got your Easter invites in your seat. There's some flyers in the lobby. Some of y'all are like me. You go and you put up flyers without permission. We get in trouble for that sometimes. Some of you are rule followers. You're going to ask for permission to put them up at Starbucks, at the YMCA, at your gym, and places like that, and that's great. I was talking in the lobby with a lady in our church, and she said, I was on Facebook Marketplace, bought some stuff for my kids, and I went to the person's house, and they had an Easter invite sign in their front yard. I didn't even know they went to our church. They went to second service. I came to first service. I said, I think you're onto something. We need to get way more yard signs around here so we all know who we are, right? Start acting right, because my church neighbor's going to hold me accountable. Anyways, told her a couple years ago, I was driving down Cedar Lane. There was a family putting a yard sign for Easter at Restore in their front yard, and I had no idea who they were. They'd been coming to our church. I hadn't met them. They hadn't met me. So and encourage you guys to make sure you're inviting people to our Easter services. I'm excited about all three of those. But we're going to start that series today, a series called Unstoppable Kingdom. And we're going to begin with a very simple message in Matthew chapter 16, if you'd like to turn there. I'm going to do a little bit of what I do on First Wednesday this morning. I'm going to teach you a little bit about this passage. I've been looking all week for my notes. I preached a message from this passage 20 years ago. And I found it late last night. Finally got my hands on it. I'll share more about that at the end of the message. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do what I've been doing on First Wednesdays. I'm going to read the passage in its entirety. And there's going to be some things that stick out to you. And then I'm going to go back and work through it verse by verse. But between reading the whole passage, I'm going to show you some pictures and lay out some context for you, help you understand what these disciples were hearing, but also, and this is really important, what they were seeing. We're going to read the word. We have the privilege of reading the words that Jesus spoke. But we also have the historical context of where he said it, why he said it, and what exactly it means. So let's read Matthew chapter 16. I'll read verses 13 through 20, and then we'll begin to dig through it. Now, when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, that's important, we'll come back to that, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. Verse 18, and I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Then he strictly charged the disciples to tell no one that he was the Christ. All right, I want to tell you a little bit about Matthew, and then I'm going to show you some really interesting photos. There are what we call the synoptic gospels that kind of lay over each other. Matthew is one of them, but Matthew's not writing like Mark did. I'm actually going to preach a passage from Mark on Easter Sunday I'm really excited about. I don't want to step on it. But when Mark ended the book of Mark, it shook a Roman's worldview to its core. But Matthew wasn't writing to Romans or Gentiles. Matthew was a Jew writing to Jews, a Hebrew writing to Hebrews. But he wasn't just any Hebrew. He was a tax collector. There came a point in Matthew's life where he turned on his people and became a tax collector. And he knew that when he did that, he could never go back to fitting into the Hebrew culture. He was considered anathema, an outcast, a misfit. He would never be welcome in Hebrew society. But Jesus says, come follow me, and he finds a place in the kingdom. And the book of Matthew is written to Hebrews, but from the point of view of a misfit inside the nation. And so this unstoppable kingdom, Matthew wants to make clear, it's for the Hebrews, but it's also for the misfits. And Mark's going to make clear it's for the Gentiles, and it's for all of us who don't quite fit in. So he has an agenda, and his agenda is this kingdom is for those whose society has forgotten. Jesus' message would simply be, those of you who think you're in, you're actually out. You Pharisees, you legalistic people, you people who should know the law and know better, you don't actually live the law. And these people who you think are out, they're actually in. These women, these people who are caught up in poverty, these fishermen who you look down upon, I'm inviting them into what God is doing. So that's who's writing this. And he makes it clear that this takes place in Caesarea Philippi. I want to show you a few pictures of Caesarea Philippi. I've got 3. The first one's just going to kind of show you the water source, and this is important. In that hole, in that rock, is this spring that to this day springs forth water. You can still see a little bit of water trickling out, but it was said to be even more productive in the year 1-2 AD. Now, in the next picture you'll see they have set up some little holes in the rock. This is where they would place different gods. We're going to talk about which gods that they would worship, because there is a myth that I'm going to tell you about that relates to this place. And this is the city, this is the area where Jesus takes the disciples to tell them what he just told them. Now, on this next picture, you'll see kind of an overview of the whole area. This is where we're going to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to leave this picture up there for a minute. The Grotto of Pan, we're going to talk about this, but in the 1st century AD, Caesarea Philippi is a bustling town because the leader of the Hebrews has built this town to honor Caesar. Philip is the son of Herod, and he wants to tie himself to Caesar. Caesarea Philippi. So he builds this area because this is where there was a festival that had grown over the centuries. I'm going to tell you about the myth in just a minute, but they were having this festival every year, and hundreds of thousands of people would gather. So Philip says, I know what I'll do. I'll build a big area. We'll make money off of this. I'll send money to Caesar. He will love me. I will love him. It will be great. But you're going to see here a couple of things. There's this Grotto of Pan. It was just outside of where this source of water was flowing out. I'll talk to you about that. And then there's this word, Banias. We're going to talk about that too. So let me give you a little bit of history about this place. This hole in the rock is actually a tributary that forms the Jordan River. There was a pagan myth that in the winter, everything begins to die because Baal, remember Baal, the god of the Old Testament, little g god that the Canaanites worshipped? That every winter he would leave earth and go down into the underworld, down into hell, and pursue his lover, his mistress. And in the Old Testament, that mistress was Ashtaroth. As the myth progressed, other different worlds, different places in the world would say it was a different mistress. But the people around that area thought that he was pursuing Ashtaroth, and she was the god of sexual fertility. And Baal was the god of plant fertility, so crop yields. So you have 2 gods of fertility messing around with one another in the underworld. She tempts him and teases him, but never gives in, and he gets frustrated and eventually comes back to the regular world, the normal world, and that's where spring comes. And these spring showers are said to be, I don't want to be crude this morning, they're said to be his seed, watering the earth and bringing life to everything around us. Now, as silly as that sounds today, this was considered scientific truth 2,000 years ago. Like, this was what they understood to be the reality of the world. And so this hole where this water comes forth was considered to be an entrance into the underworld. This myth would eventually evolve, and under the Greeks it would move from Baal worship to Pan worship. You're going to see that Grotto of Pan there, which was the preferred god of the Greeks. They're going to call this place Panias. Panias. And the Romans, as they do, tend to muddy things up that the Greeks did, and they eventually called it Banias, as you can see there. But every year there was this festival called Pan. God Pan was the merging of a man and a goat. Remember that? God, little g. There would be a festival called Pandemonium. It's where we get our word for pandemonium. I know on a Sunday morning, there are little ones in the room, so I'm going to be very careful how I describe to you this festival, but make no mistake about it, it makes Las Vegas and Mardi Gras seem like child's play. It's gross, it's disturbing. How they would worship is every year this statue would be wheeled into town. It was a 6-foot statue of male genitalia. The women would work themselves into a frenzy as that statue would work its way through the crowd. And their goal was to excite Pan. The men, on the other hand, would go to the Grotto of Pan and engage in bestiality with goats to please the god Pan. If this sounds disgusting, it should. It's awful. It's wicked. It's gross. And this is the place that Jesus takes his disciples. Now, these are misfits and outcasts in Hebrew society, but they're still Hebrews. And walking into this town, they know what's happening here, and we don't know when they go. We're reading in Matthew, in one of the other Gospels, it makes clear that there is a crowd around them. It could have been this crowd. These Hebrews were disturbed by what they knew was going on here, what may have been going on there. And then Jesus uses that language of gates of hell as they're looking at a place that has a literal gate to the underworld. The Romans would actually call this place the gates of hell, literally, because they understood it to be an entrance into the underworld. Like a good rabbi, Jesus takes his followers to a place that makes them uncomfortable to teach them a truth that we are going to dive into this morning. Let's go back verse by verse through what Jesus actually introduced them to. And when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked the disciples, "This is the question we must wrestle with today. Who do people say that the Son of Man is?" He doesn't start with them. He says, "Who do other people?" Now, let's be honest with ourselves. He takes them to a place where they don't care. They don't care who the Son of Man is. They're involved in bestiality and false idol worship. There are idols all around them. Now, today it may look different, but it's the same thing. We live in a world that says anything goes. If Jesus were to ask you, "Who does the world say that I am?" You'd say, "A good teacher, nice guy, a guy who talked about love." But Jesus isn't actually interested in what the other people have to say. He wants to know in verse 14, and they said, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." But he said to them in verse 15, "Who do you say that I am?" It's interesting that he's compared to Elijah. Maybe Jesus was a little more fiery than we give him credit for. Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. John the Baptist, of course, makes sense. But he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And here's my point this morning, brothers and sisters. You can get yourself worked up into a frenzy about the world needs to know who Jesus is. Yeah, but who is he to you? I am for gospel initiatives. I am for sharing the gospel. I want Jesus' name everywhere. But if we don't actually know who Jesus is, know him personally, and walk with him and trust him, even in the hardest moments of life, we do not do justice to sharing the gospel. So he says, before we can get all these people educated on who I am, I got to know that you know who I am. So forget what the world says this morning. In this church, in every church, we got to be crystal clear. Who's Jesus? That's right. He's the Son of the living God. Now, notice what Peter says. Simon Peter, and I love this, because Peter usually says something, and Jesus is like, "Oh, Peter. Almost, Peter." Not this time. By the way, this is why some of us just say stuff, because every once in a while, you nail it. And Jesus is like, "Way to go, buddy." I knew it. I knew eventually I'd get it right. Simon Peter said, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Now, all the other disciples are like, I wonder how long Jesus waited to answer. Jesus, verse 17, answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah." This is a phrasing, the way he says it, that we're a follower or a disciple to hear their leader to say, it would just bring joy. Like, oh my goodness, he's really saying, this is it, Peter. "Flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Verse 18. And this is one of the most debated verses in all of Scripture. Protestant Reformation hinges on this verse. The Catholic Church holds to some very different teaching than most of us about this passage. Verse 18, "I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell," we're going to leave this up here for a minute, "shall not prevail against it." I'm a nerd, and I know Greek. I say I know Greek. I can help people understand Greek. I can't actually speak it, but I know what's happening here in this passage in the New Testament, which was written in Greek. Petra, he says, "on this rock." The word Peter and the word rock are very similar, Petros, Petra. But Jesus says, and this is where he renames him. He's like, "Peter, you've done such a good job. I'm going to rename you. I'm going to call you Peter." And it's great. But Peter is Petros, which is masculine. And then he says, "on this rock," Petra, which is feminine. This is really a problem. Whereas the Roman Catholic Church specifically would say, this is Jesus making Peter the infallible pope, and he can do no wrong from this point. Paul would later confront Peter. Peter in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, I believe it is, even says, "I am not in complete control here." Like, there is a lot more than we can parse out this morning. But in the Greek language, there is this clear distinction between Peter and this rock. Did God use Peter? Absolutely. He preaches the gospel. Thousands are saved. It is incredible what God does through him. But on this rock, clearly, the rock is an idea, not a person. It's the statement that Peter's just made, brothers and sisters. Jesus was never intending to build his church on one man, much less one human. It was on what Peter had just said. You're the Christ. You're the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. Brothers and sisters, our church is not built on what style of music we like. Our church is not charging the gates of hell because we use this version of the Bible and not that. What it all boils down to is who we believe Jesus is, what it is we believe he did. He died, he rose. He's our Savior. He says the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I think I've shown you the pictures now. They're standing near the gates of hell. Why would Jesus say this? This is good. Because if you're the disciples, wouldn't you like Jesus to build his church only in Jerusalem where it's a little safer, a little cleaner? I mean, a little more modest, a little more put together. Jesus says, I'm going to build my church in the face of everything that is wicked and wrong, in the face of injustice, in the face of all kinds of gross, immoral, sexual sin, all kinds of greed and hate. That's where I'm going to put you. And you can almost sense that there are a little bit of nervousness in these boys because they can't bring themselves all to say it. But Peter says, I'll say it. Maybe they were standing around. And later, we're not going to read it this morning, some of them get a little bit squishy. And Jesus says, if you're going to be ashamed of me, I'll be ashamed of you. That tells us there are probably some of these Caesarean Philippians right around them, watching them. Why? Because the guys get nervous and they can't bring themselves to really own up to who Jesus is. Now, I just want to share with you 3 ways this should shape and affect our mindset as believers. Christ's kingdom requires a shift in how we think and live. I'm going to share 3 of them with you that he's just laid out for us here. Number 1, we need to resist the desire to conform. You can sense it. Peter speaks up, but these guys are surrounded by an uncomfortable setting. And the natural inclination is, I'm just going to do what everybody else is doing. What everybody else is doing is gross and it's wrong and it does not lead to human flourishing. It's stupid. That was stupid. By the way, today it's stupid. What our culture is putting on us is dumb. Very dumb. Hey, just live for yourself. That's stupid. No generation of humans has ever believed they are all by themselves, completely independent. We've always had this interdependence on other people. We find in the scriptures all kinds of passages that tell us to depend on one another, to love one another, to support one another, to encourage one another. But today, in the rugged West, we have the rugged individual, and you don't need anybody else. Brother and sister, you do need other people. You need your brothers and sisters. You need people who hold you accountable. Resist the desire to conform. The world is always going to be putting you into a mold, and it's never going to make sense because the world is constantly resisting the mold of God, the way that God has shaped and designed and created us to live, to breathe, to be. Number 2, the second shift, believe that Jesus is who he says that he is. 20 years ago, the Da Vinci Code came out. I remember watching that movie, and at the end, the whole Tom Hanks spiel, why does Jesus have to be the Son of God? What if he was just a good guy? And it's this real because if he's not, it doesn't matter what he did. We got to take him at his word. If he's not the Son of God, if he didn't resurrect, if he's just some myth or story, then it's one more myth or story that makes no sense, and we're just cells clumped together, moving from life to death, and none of this matters. It absolutely matters who he was, because God looked down in his sovereignty and sent his Son to rescue us. We need more than just a mythical hero who came to help us and make us feel better about ourselves. We need someone who rescued us from our sin, our shame, our guilt, the endless cycle that we live through. And over, Christ calls himself the Christ. He says, I am the Son of Man, I am the Son of God. And over, his disciples say this about him. This is why they were all put to death, because they would not give in to the temptation that Caesar put before them. Hey, just say he's, recant a little bit. You got to worship me as Caesar. You can't say Jesus is this one true God. And then the third mind shift in your mindset is you got to learn to think offensively, not defensively. The church today is such a defensive place. Oh, let's protect what we've got. Let's play it safe. We don't want to take any risks. Jesus takes them to one of the riskiest places to talk to them and says, this is the truth. I'm going to build my church on this. Jesus is all about offense. The gates of hell really tell us a lot. Jesus isn't saying like, oh, the chariots of hell won't prevail. No, he uses the word gates. Gates are a defensive mechanism. His point is we should be on the offensive, taking the gospel all the way to the enemy's gates. We ought to be the most. And by the way, I'm using the word offensive both ways. Brothers and sisters, if you think Jesus isn't a stumbling block, you haven't been paying attention. He is the ultimate stumbling block. I am for you using wisdom. I am for you being wise. I am for you being kind. But make no mistake about it, there's going to come a point where sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ, it is going to be offensive, and you got to be okay with that. You got to be okay with that. Why is it offensive, Pastor Mark? Because every one of us want to be in charge. And the gospel of Jesus is surrender and bend the knee to him. And none of us want to do that naturally. Just like you didn't want to obey your parents, just like you don't want to obey your boss, just like you don't want to obey the speed limit, just like you don't want to obey the officer that pulls you over, just like you don't want to obey. And Christ says, I am the ultimate authority, and I want you to surrender and trust me and believe that my way is actually better than your way. Thinking offensively puts you in a position where you're constantly not focused on protection or what's safe, but taking risks for the gospel. I'll say it this way. What would you attempt to do if you knew that your success was guaranteed by God? All right, the first 30 seconds you're going to spend thinking silly things, right? The lottery, a business that really rubs it in that guy from high school's face that he thought he was better than me, whatever. But if you're given this question and you give it some serious thought, those silly things melt away pretty quick. And you start to think, well, if I could just do one thing and know that I was guaranteed to succeed. What would it be? Start a business that blesses generations. All right. Ask that person out. You know the reason we don't often do these things? It's because we're afraid of if it doesn't work out or if we make a mistake. We've convinced ourselves that if we make one mistake, it's going to sideline everything. I've got really good news for you. Jesus has just guaranteed these guys the thing that I'm leaving in your hands, it's going to work out. And Peter doesn't waste 30 seconds making a mistake. You want to read it with me? Matthew 16, verse 21. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. We know this is the gospel. They hear this like, this is awful. We can't let this happen. So Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. Jesus, I don't know what you've been thinking, but you're wrong. Saying, far be it from you, Lord, this shall never happen to you. Verse 23, but he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. What a day Peter's having. You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. Blessed are you. You could just see Peter. That's right. That's right. You guys see this? Jesus said, I was on top. Get behind me, Satan. You're a hindrance to me. For you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man. Hey, don't miss this. Don't let mistakes pull you off mission. Peter's the highest, the highs, the lowest, the lows. You know what I'd have done if Jesus said, you're a hindrance to me? I'd be like, all right, dude, I'm out. I'll go back to fishing. Not Peter. He's like, oh, just one more mistake I've made. He's going to be confronted by Paul. He makes mistakes, but he doesn't let his mistakes pull him off of mission. You know, if you have anyone in your life who seems like a success in anything, you ought to ask them about their failures. They've got way more failures than people are aware of. If you have a Christian in your life who seems to be mature, who seems to be walking with the Lord, who seems to have it all figured out spiritually, ask them about the mistakes they've made, and they will give you a laundry list of times the Lord has forgiven them, has redeemed them, rescued them, and restored them. Just look through the church and all the mistakes we've made, and yet the Lord continues to build his church. The good news is Jesus is building his church, not us. Last thing I'll say, and then I'm going to work into my closing. The world is looking for believers who actually believe what we have read this morning. Not some soft, Jesus just one of many prophets. Yeah, sure. That thousands marched valiantly to their death to protect the truth that he died and rose, and they witnessed it. He's more than a prophet. Well, Jesus is just another good teacher. Jesus' church is responsible for so much good in this world. Do you understand that even colleges today, most of them, they trace their roots to the Christian movement, wanting there to be an education system in our country and other countries? You know, most hospitals find their funding and founding documents to be based on churches that got together and pooled their resources. Anything good we have, it's often, you trace it back, it is the good news of the gospel transforming the way we live as men and women. I was hoping I'd be done, but I have time, and I don't want to share this next part. I asked you what you would do. If you knew, the Lord would bless it. If you'll allow me, I will be a bit transparent. And I will tell you what I am attempting to do as a pastor and what I hope we can do as a church. Our church just celebrated 10 years, and our church is healthy. God has blessed us. We are very, very responsible for these blessings the Lord has given to us. The average church in America today is struggling. They've either plateaued or they're declining in attendance. The average church has 1 to 2 people on staff, and it's by a thread, and we are blessed. We are very blessed. And as a result, we support missions. We do so much good work in our community. You guys know all about that. I told you I preached a message on this passage when I was 20. These are my notes. They are terrible, awful notes. I could barely read them. And at the end of my message, I said, this promise is still powerful today. And as a 20-year-old, I knew I was committed to planting a church, building the church, best I could with my life. When I was 30, I went around and I raised money using this super sleek design. I mean, guys, you should really check this out after service. Hours of my life designing this. And as a 30-year-old, I had a plan of a church we were going to start. And I had this timeline of what we would do in our first year, what we would do in years 2 to 4. And by the grace of God, some of those things came true. I look at some of them, they're nonsense. Like, there was no way we were ever going to do those things. We're going to start 3 college campus ministries. We have not done that, and we do not have the resources to do that. But we support those who do. But we do have 30 small groups now. We do have a youth group. We do give more. One of our goals was to give $50,000 to missions. We gave $120,000 to missions last year. God has been good. Yeah. And this is all fine, and this is where we say, praise God, our church is healthy. And if we're not careful, that's where we get safe. When I was 30, I was raising money in some churches, and I used this slide that I'm going to put up there. It's a picture of the state of Virginia and what they call the golden crescent of population. And the movement I was raised in, most of their churches are out in the western part of the state, and there are other good movements that have plenty of churches in this area. And when I put this together, I said 7 out of 10 people live in this crescent, 5.5 million people. Today it's 9.5 million people live in Hampton Roads, Richmond, and DC metro areas. The Lord has blessed us. You know what I want and hope we can do together over the next 10 years? And why we're so focused on raising sons and daughters? Because our goal is not just to absorb and enjoy God's blessings here. On the last page, I put this little thing in here that's going to hold me accountable for the rest of my life. Once we get healthy, we will send out 50 people to start a new church. By year, it was 5+. We're beyond 5+. I don't know when we're going to do that. I don't know how we're going to do that. But that is what our church is called to. Now, good news, we're not the only church doing this. There are other churches we partner with. Our church and many other churches have partnered with together to plant a church in Fredericksburg. The Bridge Church is a church that we support. Pastor Chris Davenport is doing a grand job. They're building a building right now in Fredericksburg proper, right outside of D.C. The Lord is building his church. I've been a little transparent with you. I hope one day that my boys are involved in helping to plant churches in Virginia where people live. The parts of D.C. that people don't want to go, the parts of Richmond that people don't want to go, because guess what? We're in the part of Hampton Roads that people don't want to go. I don't know if you know this. If you just moved here, we're glad you're here. It is so good to see you this morning. I don't know if you're aware. People have a problem with Portsmouth. We don't. We love Portsmouth. When I was raising money, even with all these sleek designs, there were large church planting outfits that told us we would never make it because it's too poor and the crime is too high, and that's not the place to plant churches. I think those are the type of places that need to have churches planted. Right? I think that if we're not careful, we will get safe even in our missions, even in our church planting, even in our endeavors to charge the gates of hell, as long as it's near the suburbs where everybody's got enough money to give and support the mission, as long as it's near the new mall where everyone feels completely safe dropping their kids off, as long as, if you can't tell, I have an agenda against the church planting movements of today. I say all that to say this. As we read Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 23, may we be more willing to fail, taking big risks and taking big shots for Jesus and his church than anything else. I don't know when, but there's coming a day where I will introduce you to a staff member of our church. I don't know who it is. They may already be on staff, they may not. And I will say, a year and a half from now, they're going to leave our church to start a church in I don't know where. And I want you to consider prayerfully going and committing a year of your life to helping them start a church. Now, you're not going to go be a dead bump on a log. You're going to help, you're going to encourage, you're going to serve, you're going to lead. And if you're not willing to do those things now, we're not really sure you're going to do them over there. We got to talk through some of that. Brothers and sisters, we have one life. I'm for you doing a good job at your work. I'm for you doing an excellent job with your children. I want to help you in any way that we can. But if we're not careful, we will just assume that everyone else is going to invest in the kingdom. When's the last time you took a risk, a big shot, invited somebody, shared the gospel, told them your story? It starts with these little things. Big things don't happen without a lot of little things working together.